please introduce yourself to everyone.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessa Boo. I am from Massachusetts, and I'm a freedom fighter that kind of got thrusted into the freedom movement over the last few years through my work in the healthcare field. I'm a licensed medic. I have a lot of experience as well in the clinical field, so I did, kind of see some things that I didn't vibe with, wasn't agreeing with people. So I ended up fighting for freedom because I realized our freedoms were being threatened. And let's see what else. I have my master's in biology. I'm currently certified as a holistic health and wellness coach, working on my certification as a holistic health practitioner. That again kind of thrusted into this, but it's all right. It was ultimately my path was to go holistic. I was actually in nurse practitioner school when the pandemic hit, what I like to call the plandemic, the shamdemic, either or I'm fine with. And they, of course, removed me from the program after about a couple of years of deferment, deferred me. And again, I wasn't going to take their shots, their mandate, all that stuff. I was refusing. So I ended up having to get out of nurse practitioner school, where I was going to go and be a holistic nurse practitioner and find my way around. So now I'm working my way up to be a holistic health practitioner. In the meantime, doing some holistic health coaching and really loving it, seeing how, healthcare should be practiced. It's how I've always believed it should. And in my experience, what I've seen is just we're not right with our medical system. I'm a medic, so I do understand that, I keep my license. I'm actually probably going to be working on an ambulance here soon to help complement my holistic work, because I do really miss the clinical hands-on and emergency medicine, which where I was going with that is I believe in 100%. I think that trauma, emergency, a good extent of critical care, give or take some questionable protocols. And, of course, there's some specialties in medicine that are, we need them. There's certain genetic disorders. There's people out there that do require medication all the time. So there are parts of medicine that are okay, but for the most part, like emergency, but for the most part, in regard to chronic care, preventative care, we we fail. Allopathic medicine fails. I don't even know why I say we anymore. I don't even really want to put emergency medicine in that bucket. But
I hear
yeah.
you.
So that's me. I'm Jess.
Okay.
Nice to meet you. Thanks,
Uh,
Rachel.
yeah. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. And I think we met on a social media platform where you were at the time talking about medical freedom. And so we clicked pretty quickly. But as you know, I think by now, Off the Deep End is about sharing content that helps people feel inspired and empowered to persevere through hardships, through setbacks. And I wonder if you'd be willing to share some of those pivotal moments.
So my life, there's been a lot. I mean, I think everyone listening probably has had a lot. And I really feel like, what Rachel kind of asked me to come on this for is basically I was brought up, I'd say I was kind of built in the fires. I consider myself to be somewhat of a warrior. I am a veteran, somewhat. I'm definitely, it's in my bones, right? It's in my blood. I've always felt this need to fight for what's right, to stand up to injustice. I also, I like to learn. I'm a scientist, so standing up for logic too. But I did have a childhood that kind of bred the warrior in me. And I grew up, initially childhood was great. I'm the oldest of now six, but my early childhood, I was the oldest of for what I'm going to talk about in regard to trauma, for the bulk, there's 4 of us. And my parents got divorced when I was in 1st grade. I was about 7 years old, which is about not long after stepfather figure stepped in. And he sexually abused me for many years through my childhood, up until I was able to leave, get out of there in college. And that sort of upbringing, he's not abusive necessarily physically. There were definitely instances, but at the same point, growing up in the 90s were a bit different than today. I think a lot of kids got smacked when they didn't do, say the right thing, or we did get the belt when it was real bad. And that would be, 1-2 lashes on the butt kind of deal. Smack on the hand if you say a bad word, that kind of thing. Nothing really where, we're getting bruises or tore open skin, stuff like that. But the sexual abuse was regular. And that had a profound effect on me very early on. I may not have necessarily been aware of all the things growing up. Of course, we're children, we're oblivious to what's happening to you and all that, or at least the meanings. And I definitely grew up, I felt different. And as I grew older, I realized I don't trust anybody for the most part. I don't like to say anybody, because there is a part of me that can be a little over trusting as well. I tend to have, so again, from my childhood, issues with male figures sometimes. But my childhood, that trauma, constant, all the time, made me, when life throws things at me, I guess my strength, my number one strength is resilience. And that's bred from my traumatic childhood. If not for what I went through, there's no doubt in my mind that I would have crumbled under the things I've been presented. Amongst all that abuse, I was living in a home that can be considered a hoarder home. And we had no money. We were very poor. We were on welfare. I was the only, we moved, I live in Massachusetts, and I live in, in the Boston area, north of Boston. And I was the only white girl in my school, getting free lunch, standing in line for the lunch ticket. And I got bullied for that. People noticed that, and I was bullied relentlessly all through my, elementary, middle school years because of that. And until I was able to kind of find my own way as an athlete. But that is what bred the warrior in me. And, I absolutely have effects from my childhood. There's no doubt that a childhood like that is going to impact someone's mind. It's called complex PTSD, if anyone wants to look at it, an actual listing of what I kind of deal with on a regular basis. But the only reason I can deal with that, and I'm not a drug addict, I'm not a prostitute, it blows my mind all the time. I think about this a lot. This comes up in my mind that, because I live, again, in an area north of Boston where a lot of kids in my generation, my boyfriend has at least 5 friends that he lost to drug overdoses. Somehow I didn't drink. Somehow I know how. It was God, my grandmother, who taught me about God, my love of God and my love of my family. I was the oldest. I knew there was an age where I figured out what was happening was wrong. And I knew that if I wasn't gonna get my head on straight, because the parental figures in my life at this point were just, they were a mess. My siblings were doomed, and I loved them to death. So these types of things, the trauma, the resilience, God, my family kept me able to stay on the right path. And, you know, for anyone, I am sorry if I offend anyone. Again, I love God. I love, you know, Jesus. I believe in all that. I grew up born again Christian. I had a psychic one day look at me. She was a patient of mine, well-known psychic. She just walked in. This was before I got to know her, but she just pointed at me and went, success. She said, success. And I've seen that throughout my life. There's never a goal I want that I'm not going to get. Like I said, they kicked me out of nurse practitioner school, my dream. Okay, I'll figure it out and do another way. Because I know that no matter how much shit, I apologize, I don't know if I can swear on here, Rachel, but no matter how much the shit the universe is going to throw at you, you can handle it. I've been through way worse, that, you know, being fired or losing a relationship, or the worst you can think of, someone's been through worse than that. And they're still kicking. They're still doing their thing. You know, they didn't let it destroy them. And again, if anyone looked into what complex PTSD comes with, I do get destroyed sometimes. But I'm doing my very best to make sure that time that I get destroyed is as minimal as possible. Of course, I take time to heal myself. Right? I love holistic medicine, so I understand mind, body, soul. So I'm going to take time to heal myself when I need to, but I'm not going to let anything destroy me, because if I did, it would have happened 30 years ago.
So Jess, if we can back up just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that you endured a lot of sexual abuse at home as a child. Like, did anybody know? Did you ask for help? Like, how did you get through that as a child?
So that's a question that it was kind of where there was an age, like I said, where I kind of when I figured out what was happening was so twisted. I knew we were poor. I knew I was stealing from canned drives at school because we didn't have food at home. I knew that we didn't have clean clothes. I figured all that out. But what I also understood was, if I said anything, I believe the age I figured this out was also the age I figured out that if I did say something, they're going to take us all away. I was more terrified of losing my siblings than, you know, that was enough to keep me from saying anything. That and which I've come to understand now as an adult through the therapy I've been through, is the guilt. I was so shamed. Well, that was the other thing. I was so embarrassed when I figured out what was going on, about what was happening to me. I started developing, I guess it's like a dissociation. Like, there was a point of the trauma where I didn't, just like you become a robot kind of thing. So that's one way, I guess, the mind, this is all, you guys, for anyone that's trained in trauma, they can understand this. This is how the brain copes. So if it was, oh my God, Jess is just amazing. No, the human body and the human mind is amazing. It helped me manage. I think there's a lot of divine intervention to that too. Again, I was the eldest. If not for my strength, we probably would have all ended up drug addicts. My siblings are very successful, all of them. We've all come from nothing. The worst we can get. This was happening to my sisters too. Not as intensely as it was with me, because once I figured things out, I started bargaining with this monster. Leave them out of it. And so it was kind of I had to be mature. I had to do it. Just had to do it. And that's where there's, I guess, two kinds of people I've noticed in the last few years. There's people that are just going to stand up when they have to do it. When you have to do what's right, you're just going to do it. And for me, that was protecting my siblings, protecting them from being in a foster home, being ripped apart, molested by foster parents, ending up in some, home in that town. We'd be on a path to nothing. We'd be on a path to drugs and all that. But like I said, they're successful. There's not a one of them that isn't. They have kids now. They're happy. So yeah, it was a matter of understanding what was going on around me, Rachel, and the power of the mind to just deal with the worst of the worst when you have to. And any veteran that's been in combat can understand something like that, when sometimes the worst of the worst is going on around you and you still can function. You can still get the mission done, get the job done.
Mm-hmm. And that is a good segue to my next question, which was that you touched on having a military background. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So I've always very goal oriented. That's one thing I want to recommend to anyone that may be struggling out there with PTSD, trauma, depression, anxiety, is to set goals for yourself. Because I notice the worst that I will get is when I don't have a goal, I don't have a purpose, I don't have something to. It's what I'm taught in holistic medicine is your spirit, the mind, body, spirit, that spirit aspect. What keeps you going? Why do you wake up and do these things? And being in the military was one of those things I always just knew I wanted to do. And I set out, I was going to do it. I took a very, very bizarre path, Rachel. I was actually going to be a veterinarian. At one point, I was in veterinary school. I was going through an officer's program with the Army through that. And then I love emergency. I was working in trauma ER for one of the biggest, best emergency hospitals right outside New York City for Cornell. And I got to learn that in emergency animal medicine, what I wanted to do is we put down about half our patients. When your trauma patient comes in or whatever it may be, chronic illness, it's so expensive to keep a dog with cancer or a dog with some kind of genetic disease or whatever. It's so expensive to keep these animals alive. Half the people can't afford it. So we become like a euthanasia service. And for anyone that, if I wanted to go do general care for animals, it'd be a whole different story. But I realized that's not what I wanted to do. I love medicine. I can always have a pet. I can always, work at a shelter or something. So I just moved on and went through. I was like, all right, so I'm not going to do the veterinary way. I guess I'm going human, because at least in human medicine, we're not going to put you down because you can't afford it. We'll do the bare minimum emergency care. And for the most part, people, I've never had money. I'm a medic. I make go ahead, look up our salaries. We don't make money. And I can get basic health care. My insurance that I get, which is in state of Massachusetts, they base it off your income. It's very reasonable. I'm grateful for it. I'm sure there's some nonsense in there that rips someone off for me to get this. But, there's ways, at least in human medicine, where we save people. So I ended up segueing into the human medical field through the Army. That was my goal, was to be an Army veterinarian. And the Army, I was able to become a medic. And I love it. I maintained my license, which I initially got through the Army. And I actually joined later in life because, again, I was doing a very random path. I was 27 when I joined. So I went in with a college degree, was able to start off as a specialist. It's an E4. And I was with the Army National Guard. I was able to travel all around the country, and I never went overseas. And, that's okay. Mixed feelings about that. I would have loved to stay in the military. I left in about 2016 because trauma tends to follow me. I'm not going to say that. I don't want to say that. That's not true. But this is that's what happened to me in the military. I had to, I mean, anyone that knows the military or has any experience being in the military knows that the whole sexual assault thing, it's an issue. There's plenty of documentaries, you guys, you can go look at it. And I dealt with a couple personal instances myself. And I was doing fairly well, I'll say, emotionally up until that point. And Rachel actually was the one that helped me realize that was kind of where it all fell off, is that last sexual traumatic experience where I had a man, put his hands on me that I didn't want to. That's kind of where I think it re-triggered all the childhood, the issues that come along with complex PTSD. And I had to leave the Army. I couldn't do it anymore. I was starting to suffer from, panic attacks. And this would be, say I'd have drill coming up. A week prior to that drill, every single day would be nothing but obsessive thinking, dealing with panic, dealing with anxiety, mood swings, can't sleep, can't eat. It just got ridiculous. And it wasn't working where I could get closer to home, and not in a fast enough time. The Army didn't really want to work with me as much as they should have. So I ended up just saying, you know what, we're getting out. And I generally discharged. And that was 2016. And since then I was, able to keep my medic license. So I've been working just clinically in the civilian sector with doing private practice and emergency room, and then most recently doing the freedom fight, kind of out of force, but happy to do it, kind of carrying that warrior off into civilian land.
What would you say are some of the bigger life lessons that you've learned as you look back? And they say hindsight is 20/20, right? What are some of the takeaways that you have from all of these experiences? So many of them are so difficult. And what would you say to someone who either has a history of abuse that's holding them back, maybe, from pursuing their dreams? Let's start with that.
You have to reframe your mind. I think I touched on it earlier, where someone's had it worse than you and they're still kicking. I think about, like, myself is a good example. As I've kind of gone through anything I've ever wanted, I do it. I could let the depression and anxiety keep me in a ball all day, which I do sometimes. Or when it gets to that point where I'm like, Jess, what are we doing? We're going to do this? We're going to keep caving into it? Sometimes you can't rely on yourself either. Like, this is where you need that mind, body, spirit. You need that soul. You need that motivation. If you don't have a spiritual self, you're doomed. There's no doubt in my mind, if I didn't have, it doesn't have to be God. I'm just going to go off God because I grew up a born again Christian, but I'm more of kind of like a universalist in a way. I take the best of them all. I also grew up with a Muslim father. So I got a Muslim father, my real father, who is clueless to this, unfortunately. My real father is Muslim and my mother is Christian. So, I grew up with what I saw as two very similar religions for the most part, aside for like the traditional aspects, their rituals and things like that, right? But in terms of their teachings, these things are very similar. So, it all comes down to those moral principles that they share. I rely on that stuff. Like, I fall back on those morals all the time. You have to hold yourself to a certain regard. And that's where I feel I've always kind of modeled for my siblings. Like my brother, same. He's about 5 years younger than me. He grew up, lost friends to drug overdose. He's now a ranger in the Army. He's off to Italy to help command a unit. He could have let our poor abusive stepfather and living in the hoarder home, he could have let that, and he could have went and followed the wrong crowd. No, he did the same thing. He set his mind on goals, and he made sure, okay, well, I'm poor, I'm gonna get a job and get good shoes so I can be a good athlete. And he worked every day at being a good athlete. Fine, me too. I'm a female, so it's a little bit tough to make a kind of a career out of being an athlete, but didn't cost any money for me to be an athlete for the most part. There were struggles being the poor kid trying to get rides sometimes, but in certain sports I couldn't play because, it does take money. Like I wanted to play hockey so bad, couldn't. But it's okay. I excelled at other things. I was really fast. I played lacrosse. I bought the cheapest ticket first. I got a job and bought the good one. So you just have to reframe your mind and the other thing is, we grew up in a very victim. It gets me so aggravated when I hear PTSD has been thrown around so much that it drives me crazy, because people like me that really suffered trauma, and I mean, of course, there are people that have PTSD because, for 1,000 reasons, but it's thrown around now because, oh, my boss yelled at me, I have PTSD now. Like, no, you don't. You just have a weak backbone. I'm sorry to say it, but life is not fair. Clearly, life isn't fair. My story alone is enough to tell people life isn't fair. I'm white. Shouldn't I have had some privilege growing up? Why was I stealing from can drives at my school? Why was I being bullied for being the white kid in line? Right? I could have framed my mind as, oh, white people should have had this and that, and I'm going to be a victim now. No, you got to take life. In the Army, they say, embrace the suck. I love that phrase. Just embrace it. It's not supposed to be easy. Take the most successful people on this planet, and they're going to tell you, I had to struggle to get here. It did not take sitting back and being comfortable. It never does. I did not get my master's degree being comfortable. To start doing this whole holistic stuff, it took me having to get up, research programs, reach out to programs. Now I got to do homework every week, sit down. I got to sit down for hours, do these lectures, but it's okay because I'm going to be so proud of myself in the end. Or I can be miserable every day. And I've done both, and I can't stand the miserable one. And it comes up because I have an issue, but I also have a mind where I've reframed it. So that's my biggest advice I can give to anybody is reframe your mind and understand that life is not supposed to be easy. We just grew up in a culture that told us that didn't tell us, frankly, it was pretty friggin' easy. Like, even me as a poor kid, I still had somewhere to sleep every night. I still had a place to get food. I could still, my needs are still being met in some form or fashion. There are kids dying of starvation. China's crazy. You got to scan your QR code to go anywhere. These kids are, they lie to them. We're being lied to all the time too. But, in comparison to the rest of the world, just be grateful your soul made it to this space and didn't end up in Korea. Reframe your mind. When you want to start being sad on yourself, remember that.
Yeah, and I would add too, in the coaching world, you often hear the term, it's all about your mindset, or the saying, it's all about your mindset. But, I personally feel like there's so much emphasis on mindset and not enough on heart set. And you have the mind and the heart of a warrior. I've said this to you many times. You have so much courage, yes, so much resilience, but you're also real. You're also showing up. You're brave enough to say the things that you're saying right now. I still struggle with X. This still, stings a little bit. That itself takes courage. So, as I've often said to you, I commend you, Jess, for what you're doing and how you're continuing to work on yourself so that you can then turn around and serve humanity in a very different way. Now you're going from working in emergency medicine to being able to do what you felt innately you always wanted it to do ultimately, which is to heal with nature. And you shared something with me last time we talked, something specific that you're going to use as a modality. Could you share a little bit of that with us?
Yeah, so there's a few modalities I'm going to use, but one that I really like that I used recently is called Bach flowers. So it's a form of emotional therapy. It's utilizing just flower essences, which are just flowers that have been bathed in the sunlight, basically, in some clean spring water. And then that's made down into tincture form. And then utilizing these essences to balance certain aspects of your emotional health. So how it does this is each flower has it's actually called resilience. So each flower has a certain aspect to it that makes it survive in nature. Well, this particular species is strong because, it tolerates, the wind really well. So it's a really strong type of resilience. So each flower has its own kind of essence, and there's 38 that have been drawn out at this point and studied and kind of determined as effective to help balance human emotions, because we're all made of the same things. We all share the same. When it comes down to it, you can go down to the physical, the same matter, the same elements. You can go down to the energy quantum level, the same type of energy. So it's just utilizing these to help balance you. You use them daily for a certain period of time, and everyone will have their own certain kind of elixir. You can do up to 7 remedies, I believe, at a time, essences at a time. And over time, it'll basically help to bring you back to a nice balanced space. So I've started practicing on myself, utilizing these. And, I've done everything. I've done the talk therapy. I've done art therapy, DBT, the meds. I've expanded my mind, those kinds of things. Those are great too. And what I've found with Bach flowers, like any other thing I've found to be effective for the issues I deal with, have been of nature. And Bach flowers has been wonderful for me. I found, I picked it about 5 specific emotional issues that I kind of struggle with, because what we're taught in holistic medicine is, if you can't get, and this is kind of what I was touching on with the spirituality, if you can't get the emotions balanced, there's no hope, and that's where it's on you to figure that out in yourself, to just have the gall to just accept that, okay, like Rachel said, I'm just real with myself a lot too. I just developed kind of like this holding myself to a very high standard. So, if my emotions aren't in a place where I'm able to think straight, be motivated, the motivation, if you're not motivated, then you're not going to make the changes. You have to really want it to do it. Because I know what it's like to be in that ball. And that's why I really like doing this, Rachel, is because I feel like I've been dealt some of the worst hand you can be dealt. And I grew up in an area where I should have ended up having an OD of Oxycontin or fentanyl. And it's not even close. It's not even on my spectrum. And I just want people to understand that if I can do it, you can do it. And for me, with the Bach flowers, if it's helping me, it can really help you guys. It doesn't have to be Bach flowers, but fall back to nature, fall back to the pharmaceuticals, not for this stuff, not for your mind, not for your mind. Unless you're, a severe, schizophrenic, psychotic, you hear voices, things like that. You're a threat to yourself, you're a threat to others. Go holistic. But even those guys, take it, get what you got to get, what you need to be stable, and then go holistic and start working with a provider that knows how to work with nature, because nothing knows us better than nature. Like, we're made of the same things. Go out and look at dandelion. You guys have probably heard now, if you've gone anywhere in natural medicine, dandelion is one of the most underrated plants on the planet. We look at it as a weed. Everyone loves to cut those things down with their lawnmower, but it's actually like a panacea, it's called. It's like a cure-all. Realistically, what it is, it's amazing for your liver. But what I was going to go with this is where you'll see dandelion grow is actually a place where there's likely been a depletion of nutrients in the soil. So dandelion will come in like it does in our body. It's great for it to detox, to clean you out, right? Dandelion will go into that soil and pretty much detox it, die away, compost itself into the soil, and then watch that spot again. And that spot will be nicely nourished next time. Nature doesn't need doctors. They take care of themselves.
That's exactly the first I heard of that. That is amazing.
I know. That's just one. That's one. My boyfriend sent me a picture of a plant. He's working in the garden at his father's house. He sent me a beautiful flower. Beautiful flower. Looks like it's out of Egypt. I go and look it up because now it's like a game to me. I go and I've looked at every weed now in my yard. There's not a weed I haven't looked at that hasn't been medicinal. A weed.
Mm-hmm.
He sends me this flower, and it's from Egypt. It's been cultivated for thousands of years. Staple of the Mediterranean diet. Good for digestion, the heart, diabetes, skin issues. We just kind of look at it like, oh, it's a pretty flower. But we have no clue how effective this stuff can be. And we haven't taken any time to study it. It's unfortunate because I'm the type where it's like, oh, I like to learn. I'm a scientist. I could take 1,000 things of information. So when I hear, you have an inflammatory problem, well, there are endless solutions to inflammation. Okay. But unfortunately, of these endless, bountiful herbs, natural products out there in nature for us to utilize, a fraction have been studied. And I'm a scientist, so I love to rely on clinical data. Right. So it's kind of tough for me to work with this. I wish there was clinical data for me to fall back on, but there isn't. This is a desperate ache in the medical field. It's being robbed of humanity is being robbed, not having our scientists studying this stuff. Which one? I've now seen. I got ground ivy out here too. That's also good for the same thing that plant's good for. Well, which one's better? Which one should I use? I'm gonna have to test them out. I'm gonna have to try them and do a muscle rub here and a muscle rub there. Which one was more effective? And the other thing is, holistic medicine teaches we're all different. Maybe it is different for me than it is for you. And in a clinical study, it says 77% saw a benefit. Okay, they'll throw that on the market right away. But you might be that 30%. You might be that 1% that has a side effect, because herbs have side effects too. We can't, poison ivy, can't eat certain things, they'll kill you. So everything, there's just so much out there desperately needs to be studied.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Bach flowers. That's where we started with that one.
Yeah. No, I love that about the Bach flowers because, you mentioned, I'm going to bring it back to you again because you're the guest here. You're the in the spotlight, but you said different flowers have a certain resilience to certain things. You're that flower, Jess. You've
Aw.
developed a resilience because of all the different things that you've endured. And I just wonder, like, moving forward, I asked you about hindsight. Now I'm talking about looking ahead, looking forward. What are some of these things that you're going to take into the future that you feel most certain came from your experiences to this point?
Resilience, for sure. The Army taught me a lot about, so I have a lot of experiences, so I can just go back to my experiences. We'll go back the last few years of the freedom movement. Far more respect for what this country was founded on. My father came here from the Middle East, and he came here because of America. And he built, again, from nothing. He now has a beautiful home north of Boston. He's got a beautiful family, successful man from nothing. And that's what America brings. So that's something I'll forever carry into my future is no matter what it comes down to, I will always say no to any type of violation of the founding rights of this country. What America is, what it's supposed to be, because what it is right now is not what America is supposed to be or what it was founded on. So carrying that love of just that there is what I call God's country. This country was blessed by God to be, it was built on the Judeo-Christian values. So this is a space where humanity should be thriving at its peak, and it's not. So making sure that's forever seen. Also in the freedom movement, I learned a lot about corruption. It was right in my circle. It was right in the freedom movement. That's something I'm going to forever have to kind of be, all of us. Again, this is where life isn't fair, where it's kind of like we grew up in America and a lot of us weren't exposed to bad things. You had a really nice life and you get into the real world and you realize there's awful monsters out there, like in all shapes and sizes. You get the guy that can do stuff like that to me, to a kid, and then you get the guy. So if there's a creature like that, what makes you think there's not the same form of fashion of creature sitting in a suit in the government?
Yeah. So you're going to be building a business of your own. How are you going to safeguard that?
But to start, for me, it's just, I have to really know and trust you if you're going to join my team. And I won't open myself up to strangers. There will be a point where I'm going to have to. I'm sure I'm going to expand to a point. But at that point, I'm going to have to be, one, successful enough where I can handle it if something happens. And two, I'll just be incredibly vigilant. I trust my gut now.
Especially as you start a business to, align your business with who you are and not settle for anything less. Well, thank you so much, Jess. It's been fun.
Yeah.
And
thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, keep us posted on what happens with you.
Yeah, I will.
All
Blessings.
right. You too.